Thanks everybody for coming to the first Texas Sports Hall of Fame Book Festival. This afternoon we're going to hear from Robert Jacobus. Robert received his BA in '89 and his MA in '94 in history from the University of Houston. He recently retired from teaching history and coaching volleyball, basketball, and tennis in Texas public schools. His last 10 years were spent teaching dual credit U.S. history at Wharton County Junior College at Foster High School in Richmond, Texas. The dual credit U.S. history program at Foster High School is the largest in the state of Texas, serving about 140 to 150 students annually. He currently teaches history at Cy-Fair College in Cypress and resides in Ivanhoe, Texas, and he's here to talk about Houston Cougars in the 1960s, death threats, the Veer offense, and the game of the century. So, Robert?
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, and you mentioned teaching in public schools. This podium is like the exact same one I used to use every day. Really is. But that, and then y'all are also lucky because, you know, I retired a couple years ago, and 2 o'clock is my nap time every day. So, you know, it's a special occasion, so I stayed up today. All right. So, but I want to thank the people here, Mr. Black, for inviting me. I think I was one of the first ones they invited way back last year, and you know, I was excited to come and everything. And I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about Houston Cougars in the 1960s. Pretty much most of the time when I talk about it, people always ask me, like, how did I get the idea for the book or why did I write it, things like that. So I thought I'd go through that a little bit and then answer some questions towards the end. And basically, it all started about, I think it was 2006. And like I said, I'm a graduate of U of H. And, you know, I'd heard stories through the years about Warren McVeigh playing for U of H football and Elvin Hayes, obviously, people like that. But around 2006 was the 40th anniversary of when Texas Western College, led by David Lattin, Houston Worthing guy, where Michael knows him, you know, he led Texas Western Miners to the NCAA championship, all-black starting five, you know, beating all-white Kentucky, and that's the year the movie Glory Road came out, and it was all this publicity, which is great. You know, it's obviously a great story, needs to be told. And then also the story I'd been hearing through the years, which is also a very important story, was Jerry Levias integrating Southwest Conference, first scholarship Southwest Conference football player. You know, John Westbrook of Baylor was first black to take the field a week before, I think, in '66. And I don't want to say I got tired of hearing about it, but it's kind of like, and like I said, they're great stories, but I was saying to myself, well, you know, we had something like that going on at U of H. And it happened actually a little bit before that. And so, you know, I started looking into it, like, you know, how U of H integrated and all that and everything. And, you know, I realized I might find a little newspaper article here or a little magazine article here, but there was really no definitive work on it or anything like that. And so I decided, well, you know, give it a shot. I'd always wanted to write a book, you know, challenge myself a little bit. So I just wanted to see if I could do it. And so, and I figured if I'm going to write a book, I'm going to have to interview the main participants. And the main participants are Bill Yeoman, who was a football coach back then, Warren McVeigh, who was, you know, the African-American player from San Antonio, Breckenridge High School, who he recruited. Now on the basketball side was Coach Guy Lewis, and then the two gentlemen he brought over from Louisiana, Elvin Hayes and Don Chaney. And I figured if I could get interviews with all five of those guys, because really, you know, it really wouldn't be much of a book if I didn't talk to those guys. So I started in 2007, and I got a call from Bill Yeoman one day. You know, I'd left a message with him, and in fact, I was pulling in to teach a summer class at Lone Star College. I was pulling in a parking spot, and he called me. And so I met with him the next week, and we talked for a pretty good while. And then a couple weeks later, I got a hold of Coach Lewis and talked to him. And then around October 2007, all right in a row, you know, I got Warren McVeigh, Elvin Hayes, Don Chaney. And I figured, you know, once I got them, you know, I was off and running. And I figured, well, I decided to make it kind of an oral history, because what I did in the end, I interviewed a little over 240 people for this book. You know, former U of H athletes, fans, cheerleaders, just, you know, Houstonians who grew up in the area at the time, you know, you name it, assistant coaches, things like that, opposing players. Before U of H integrated in 1964, I talked to a lot of opposing African-American players who would come in with schools like Cincinnati, UCLA, places like that, and they would come in, especially in basketball, when they come in and play U of H at little Jefferson Fieldhouse, which used to be on campus there, they were treated horribly. And so I interviewed a bunch of them, like, how were you treated before U of H was integrated? You know, and Oscar Robertson, people like that. Yeah, and they were not treated well. In fact, some of them said Houston was the worst place of all, as far as the taunts and everything like that, and throwing quarters and ice at them, and you name it, oranges, they threw at them. I thought that was interesting. But so I decided to make an oral history after interviewing all those people for the most part. And I looked at what was Houston like before integration in general, which roughly around 1960, when Texas Southern students started protesting, just like the North Carolina A&T students protested the lunch counter sit-ins. TSU students started doing that in March of 1960, and things just kind of started rolling from there, more or less. And then U of H kind of, went along with it. And the U of H student body was actually integrated before the athletic program, and that was the summer before 1962, summer session of 1962. I was actually able to talk to the president of U of H back then, Dr. Philip Hoffman, not long before he passed away. And he basically they integrated in the summer because less students, less publicity. And he told me, he said, I didn't want another Alabama or Mississippi on my hands, and it went very peacefully. And they had a media blackout, which was supported by the people of Houston and all that and everything. And then I looked at the lives of Yeoman and Lewis, coming to U of H. A lot of people don't realize Guy Lewis was U of H's first star athlete right after World War II, star basketball player. And then he was an assistant coach, and then when Alden Pache retired, Coach Lewis stepped in, coached for 30 years. And, both, and then Yeoman came from Michigan State, played at Army, came from Michigan State in 1961, December. Both coaches realized pretty quick that they needed better athletes. And, interviewing them and talking to people, it didn't matter to them. Best athlete available, didn't matter what color they were. And, Lewis fielded some pretty good teams, all white teams. But basketball wasn't real big in Texas up until the last 20, 30 years. It was football. And so he went up to the Midwestern states like Indiana, places like that, to recruit a lot of his players, and they would come down. And they achieved a measure of success. They went to the NCAA a couple times in the early 60s, but they couldn't quite get over the hump. When Yeoman came, he did pretty well his first year, but he noticed there was a little bit of a talent drought. And I tell a story in the book about how in '62, I believe it was, he met with several of the black leaders in Houston, businessmen, things like that. Quentin Meese, who was one of the leading leaders in town for the black population. And they met over at the old Shamrock Hilton Hotel, and Coach Yeoman said he got up in front of all these gentlemen, and he said, I'm prejudiced. And he said everybody all the black gentlemen in the audience kind of gasped, and he says, I'm prejudiced against bad football players. And and he kind of helped, and he basically got their help to help integrate U of H, things like that. Well, and then both Yeoman and Lewis had to figure out who are we going to bring in here, because it had to be the right person, because they were going to face certain challenges and things like that. And Yeoman decided, and nobody thought they could get him to come to the U of H campus because he was the top recruit in the country, and that was Warren McVeigh out of San Antonio Breckenridge High School, and running back. And U of H kind of got in the game late with him, but that's who they recruited. And a couple factors in what I found real interesting in my research or talking to these guys is with all three players, McVeigh, Hayes, Cheney, their moms are the ones that made the decision, pretty much. Warren didn't want to be far from his mother. U of H was the only major college close to San Antonio where mom could come see him play, because UT wasn't going to take him yet. UT was still a couple years away from integrating their athletic programs, things like that. So Yeoman realized he had a shot, and so they said they focused on mama, and and eventually Warren chose U of H. Huge surprise, top recruit in the nation going to, and U of H is kind of considered a renegade school, outlaw school, things like that. Guy Lewis probably would have recruited a Houston player. Well, he'd actually tried to get David Lattin to come to U of H. And he wanted, but it was a year too early. When Lattin graduated in '63, I believe, from Worthing, Coach Lewis wanted him to go off to a junior college for a year or two, and then when U of H had integrated, come back. And that's what Lattin did, and his intention was to come back to U of H, but then in the meantime, he had a really good junior college career. No, I'm sorry, I'm thinking McCoy McElmore. Yeah, I'm thinking McCoy McElmore did that, and he was kind of the predecessor to Lattin in 1960 when he graduated from Yates, and he was a big-time recruit. And Lewis wanted him to come to U of H, and he went off to junior college for a couple of years in Kansas, Moberly Junior College in Missouri. Sorry, and but after a couple of years, McElmore decided to go to Drake, and so he didn't come to U of H. And then 3 years later, Coach Lewis tried to talk David Lattin into come to U of H, but he decided not to do that, go off to junior college and all that, and he went to Tennessee State for a little while, and then he ended up at Texas Western. So, but really, other than that, high school basketball in the state of Texas just weren't the greatest prospects in the world. So he went across the border to Louisiana, and Don Chaney he had heard of from Baton Rouge because he was a Parade Magazine All-America, things like that, and everything. But Elvin Hayes was kind of the wild card in the whole thing, from a tiny town of Rayville, Louisiana, and I've been through there, not much there. And Coach Lewis sent his assistant coach,